doing? This is Dr. Thompson. Welcome back to Modern English Grammar. And what I'd like to talk with you today is about a review of the first two assignments that you did. So that was on syntactic categories, or we were calling parts of speech. And so if you look through those two assignments and the comments that I have on them, please, as you're listening to this lecture, take a look at your assignment so that you make sure if you have anything marked, you know why it is that it should be something else. If you have any questions, please let me know, okay? Don't hesitate. Send me an email. Please send me an email through the Blackboard system, through the course system, and that way I'll be able to get back to you guys with more information if you need it. So I'm going to focus mainly in talking about the types of problems that came up for some of you repeatedly in doing the assignment, just so that you can be sure that you have this done 100% for Thursday for the test. So let's take a look at the examples. So the first example is the kind-hearted old woman, the kind-hearted old teacher had given the poor kids some red apples. So the kind-hearted old teacher had given the poor kids. Okay. The kind-hearted old teacher had given poor kids some red apples. Okay, so what's going on here is that the only thing that you need to do for this part of the test is just provide the syntactic category label for each of the words. In other words, don't worry about phrases, don't worry about what is constituting the noun phrase, the adjective phrase, how words are combining with each other. Don't think about that, just focus on each individual word and what each individual word is. So when you look at the sentence, the kind-hearted old teacher had given the poor kids some red apples. The first word, the, you know is going to be a determiner. Why? Because it's a definite article. So if you wanted to do a test to know, does this fit into the position that a determiner fits, what would your test be for that? So remember, he wrote blank other books. He wrote the other books. Yes, it fits into that position, therefore it must be a determiner. So whenever you're asking yourself the question, if you're not sure, just try to fit it into any of those positions and see whether it's functioning as if it's a determiner or a verb or whatever it is that you think it might be. So you have kind-hearted, and some of you pointed out that this seems to be a compound because you have the kind, and really if you think about it, the kind here is modifying hearted, right? So a kind-hearted person as opposed to a cold-hearted person. So you have modification going on within this item, but it's probably the case that the meaning is playing the role as a single word. In other words, this is what we call a compound. It's a word that is made up of more than one word. So for example, when you have the word blackboard, what is a blackboard? When you put stress on the first word, blackboard, is that thing that you write on with chalk, right? Whereas if you put stress on the second unit, a blackboard, so for example, if I tell you I'm writing on the blackboard, that means I'm writing on a board which is black. You know, so a blackboard could not be, it could be something other than black. It could be green, and I could still call it a blackboard. But a blackboard is no longer a compound. In other words, it's just a regular phrase, a board, which is black, which has the property of being black. So that's the difference between compounds and non-compounds. And so probably kind-hearted, you're going to think of as being a compound in the sense that it's contributing a single meaning to this phrase. So in other words, what type of meaning is it contributing? It's modifying, it's giving you information about the kind-hearted old teacher. Aha! We see that what we're talking about here is a teacher. and we know that teacher is a nominal. How do we know that? Because you could put into subject position that expression. So you can say, teachers might be interesting. Remember, if it goes into the subject position, then you know for sure it's a nominal. And given that kind-hearted is telling you about the type of teacher, you know that this is therefore an adjective. So if you had put kind as modifying hearted, and then hearted as modifying teacher as a unit, that's fine. That's no problem. Whatever you had done with kind-hearted as a unit is okay. But the whole thing structurally is modifying teacher. And then you get to old, and you think, okay, what is old doing? Old is giving you information about teachers. So the same thing is modifying a nominal, therefore you know it has to be an adjective. Okay, we said that teacher is a nominal because it fits into the position of the subject in the sentence. And then we look at had given the poor kids some red apples. Okay, so many of you guys had a labeling like this. Had and given were verb and verb. Why do we not want to do that? Because this is saying that both of these items, had and given, are of the same category. But remember, we saw that there's reason to think that auxiliary verbs like had and be and was and were, these guys are behaving differently from main verbs. So whenever you have more than one verb next to each other, whenever you have 2 verbs, 3 verbs, 4 verbs all in a row, you know that the last verb in that sequence is the main verb. It's the only main verb. You only have one main verb per sentence. So in other words, you're going to identify had and given are both verbs, but this guy is the main verb. Therefore, any other verb that is appearing before it has to be an auxiliary verb. So you could label this as auxiliary verb. So just keep in mind, if you ever have a sequence in English of more than one verb, you have to have an auxiliary there. The first one, or maybe the first 2, or maybe the first 3, right? She had been crying. Had been crying is that whole verb group, and then crying is the head, is the main verb, and then had been, these are both auxiliary verbs. So both had and been are preceding the main verb, and therefore they're auxiliary verbs. So review those if you are not super comfortable with labeling all the auxiliary verbs. Okay, and then you've got the poor kids, some red apples. So the, you know, is the definite determiner. You could do the test. So he wrote the other books, something like that. So that's determiner. Poor is giving you information about kids. How do we know that kids is a noun? Well, we see it in the plural form, right? We have this S. And not only do we have this S, because of course we have many words in English that end in S that are not plural. The important thing is that the meaning that you have here is a plural meaning. In other words, it's kid as singular, and then when you add the S, it becomes plural. So you know for sure that this is a nominal, and you know that poor is telling you what kind of kids, therefore poor must be an adjective. Okay, and then you've got some red apples, and many of you here had adjective, adjective, noun. Okay, so let's first think about this noun apples. Again, we see the plural marker S, and we know that the meaning that it carries is plurality, because if you compare apple with apples, the only difference is you have singular versus plural. So that would be an argument to say that this is a noun. Red is telling you about the type of apples. It's modifying apples, so it must be an adjective. And it would look like some is doing the same thing. It's modifying, you know, how many red apples do you have? So it would seem to make sense that we would want to say that it's an adjective. However, keep in mind that determiners always modify nominal expressions. So in a way, they're similar to adjectives because they play the same role semantically in the sentence. However, how are they different from adjectives? They're different from adjectives because they always have to occur first in the noun phrase. So you don't have the option of having a determiner adjective, adjective, determiner, determiner, adjective. In other words, right, so you can't have the sequence where an adjective precedes a determiner. You can't say, they bought read some apples. It always has to be some red apples. Why? Because since some is a determiner in English, the determiners always have to occur first. So you would know that this can't be an adjective because you wouldn't be able to put anything else in front of it. Another way to know that this is a determiner in English is if you do that test. So if you say, he wrote other books, he wrote some other books. It fits into that position, therefore it's a determiner. Okay, so let's think about the second example.